A Course in Miracles, Lesson 70, March 15th, 2021. My salvation comes from me. All temptation is nothing more than some form of the basic temptation not to believe the idea for today. Salvation seems to come from anywhere except from you. So too does the source of guilt. You see neither guilt nor salvation as in your own mind and nowhere else. When you realize that all guilt is solely an invention of your mind, you must also realize that guilt and salvation must be in the same place. Understanding this, you are saved. This reminds me, I started watching a Mind Valley course called Wild Fit. And the guy is passionate about teaching people how to boost their immune system. And so while everything was being shut down and they were keeping people from the sun and fresh air and, all these things, he said, like, he went wild and started talking to people. So you can go on mindvalley.com, look up Wild Fit. All Mind Valley has all these free courses, and then they lead to larger courses. So you can pay for the larger version of the course, but they give you so much for free. It's a really cool thing. So you'll want to take every class maybe that you try out, but just give it like 24 to 48 hours to see. And I always recommend people take like 4 or 5 free Mind Valley courses before they pay for one. But this Wild Fit guy, I love the way he says everything so far. And he says, if we can suppress the immune system, then we know that we must be able to boost it up. So there's all these ways to suppress the immune system with drugs, sugar, stress, lack of sleep, lack of oxygen. All you devil maskers out there, take a lesson. So Wild Fit, if you want to look at that. But it goes along with this. It's like, when you realize that all guilt is solely an invention of your mind, you must also realize that guilt and salvation must be in the same place. And it reminds me of this guy saying, if you can suppress the immune system, then we must be able to boost it. All right, Wild Fit. High marks. Wild Fit on mindvalley.com. Okay. So they must be in the same place. Guilt and salvation must be in the same place. Understanding this, you are saved. The seeming cost of accepting today's idea is this. It means that nothing outside yourself can save you. Nothing outside yourself can give you peace. But it also means that nothing outside yourself can hurt you or disturb your peace or upset you in any way. Today's idea places you in charge of the universe, where you belong because of who you are. This is not a role which can be partially accepted, and you must surely begin to see that accepting it is salvation. It may not, however, be clear to you why the recognition that guilt is in your own mind entails the realization that salvation is there as well. God would not have put the remedy for sickness where it cannot help. That is the way your mind has worked, but hardly His. He wants you to be healed, and so He has kept the source of healing where the need for healing lies. Oh, someone was telling me too. I think it was Donna. Where there's poison ivy, there grows a jewel plant, like jewel plants. And that's the remedy for poison ivy. That God puts plants next to each other that are remedies for the... So that's pretty cool. All right. He wants you to be healed, and so He has kept the source of healing where the need for healing lies. You have tried to do just the opposite, making every attempt, however distorted and fantastic it might be, to separate healing from the sickness for which it was intended and thus keep the sickness. Your purpose was to ensure that healing did not occur. Of course, they're identifying with the little I, ego mind. God's purpose, big I, spirit mind, was to ensure that it did. Today we practice realizing that God's will and ours are really the same in this. God wants us to be healed, and we do not really want to be sick because it makes us unhappy. Therefore, in accepting the idea for today, we are in agreement with God. He does not want us to be sick, neither do we. He wants us to be healed, so do we. We are ready for 2 longer practice periods today, each of which should last some 10 to 15 minutes. We will, however, still let you decide when to undertake them. We will follow this practice for a number of lessons, and it would, again, be well to decide in advance when would be a good time to lay aside for each of them and adhere to your own decision as closely as possible. Begin these practice periods by repeating the idea for today. My salvation comes from me. Adding a statement signifying your recognition that salvation comes from nothing outside of you. You might put it this way. My salvation comes from me. It cannot come from anywhere else. Then devote a few minutes with your eyes closed to reviewing some of the external places where you have looked for salvation in the past, in other people, in possessions, in various situations and events, and in self-concepts which you sought to make real. Recognize that it was not there. Tell yourself, my salvation cannot come from any of these things. My salvation comes from me and only from me. And in my looking, I realized how I was looking for salvation in my mother staying alive. So in that way, my mom was a like an external place, a person, and a possession. I needed my mom, which I possessed. I own her. She's mine. And she's also a person. I needed her to stay alive for me. And I processed everything to the best that I could, but it wasn't until, that was April. Almost a year later. No, 2 years. 2 years later, when my enlightened teacher in professional healer school told me that the blue I saw during meditation, he said the blue you saw was your liver releasing anger. And I did see blue, and I was like, well, how did he see that? And when I meditated on it, it was anger at my mom for dying, and I didn't want to believe that was true, but it was. She let me down. She just abandoned me here on the physical earth plane, and no, it's all fine. She did her thing, and she raced her own race, lived her own life. But I do love her. But she just doesn't want to be my mom. She wants to be a soul free. Okay. But yeah, so the point was that people can also be possessions, and my mom was a possession. I had her all wrapped up, my mom. All right. Also, self-concepts. Think, if I lose 25 pounds, then there's my salvation. So, okay. My salvation cannot come from any of these things. My salvation comes from me and only from me. Now we will try again to reach the light in you, which is where your salvation is. You cannot find it in the clouds that surround the light, and it is in them you have been looking for it. It is not there. It is past the clouds and in the light beyond. Remember that you will have to go through the clouds before you can reach the light. But remember also that you have never found anything in the cloud patterns you imagined that endured or that you wanted. Since all illusions of salvation have failed you, surely you do not want to remain in the clouds looking vainly for idols there when you could so easily walk on into the light of real salvation. Try to pass the clouds by whatever means appeals to you. And if it helps you, think of me holding your hand and leading you. And I assure you, this will be no idle fantasy. So we all held hands in the Renegade Yogi. We all held hands. We all walked together. Okay. For the short and... I assure you, this will be no idle fantasy. That's so cute. For the short and frequent practice periods today, Remind yourself that your salvation comes from you and nothing but your own thoughts can hamper your progress. You are free from all external interference. You are in charge of your salvation. You are in charge of the salvation of the world. Say then, my salvation comes from me. Nothing outside of me can hold me back. Within me is the world's salvation and my own. So just the italicized, the lesson 70, my salvation comes from me. My salvation comes from me. It cannot come from anywhere else. And then after looking for where you have looked for salvation in the past, people, possessions, situations, and events, and self-concepts, where you sought to make real, recognize that it was not there. Tell yourself, my salvation cannot come from any of these things. My salvation comes from me and only from me. And then the short practice periods, very, very often, 87,427 times today. My salvation comes from me. Nothing outside of me can hold me back. Within me is the world's salvation and my own. That's pretty much all I said with the short practice periods. Was, my salvation is the world's salvation. It's like, I didn't write it on my hand, but that's what it was like. My salvation and the world's salvation are one. So, all right. And it's the same as when I say, my highest best is the highest best. All right. I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you for doing this.